The Unforgiving Servant. Let's explore the parable of the unforgiving servant. Jesus teaches us the need to have forgiveness in our hearts. For as we have been forgiven much, we must forgive much. He teaches us the sins against each other are small by comparison to the magnitude of sins against God. And he teaches that we must forgive to be forgiven. The On Fire Cafe presents the study of parables. The Unforgiving Servant. Compassion promotes forgiveness. Matthew 18:23-35. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. But forasmuch as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife and children, and all that he had, and payments to be made. And the servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion, and loosened him and forgave him the debt. A servant owing a great debt was brought before the king. His debt was so great, there is no way he could ever pay the king back for what he owed. At first, the king was ready to sell him and his family and all that he owned to recover such a great debt, but he pleaded with the king. He fell down before him broken, asking for his patience, promising he would pay him everything he owed. The king was so moved by the servant's pledge, he was filled with compassion, so he let go of the debt and he forgave the servant and released him. In the kingdom of heaven, the servant is mankind, who owes God a great debt. For mankind has sinned so greatly that we are unable to ever pay back such a debt to God. But man falls down on his knees broken, pleading for patience and promising that he will sin no more. God, being so moved by his love for mankind, feels compassion toward man's struggles with his sinful nature. Man keeps trying to let go of sin but fails again and again. So God sent his Son to die on the cross for mankind's sin, to wash man clean of the sin by the blood of the Lamb. In so doing, forgiving and releasing mankind from the debt. The double standard of the unforgiving servant. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence, and he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me that thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. The king's servant, now free from his debt to the king, comes upon another servant who owes him a debt. He demands immediate payment from him for the debt he owes. This man does not have the means to repay the debt. He falls down before him broken, asking for his patience, promising he will pay him everything he owes. But the king's servant does not show mercy to his fellow servant. He does not act with the same compassion that was extended to him. He mercilessly casts him into prison until the debt can be repaid. In the kingdom of heaven, this is representative of how one man treats another man. God has forgiven man for his trespass, but man does not always forgive his brother for trespass against him. He has not granted grace to his fellow man, even though grace was granted to him. The punishment of the unforgiving servant. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all that debt, because thou desirest me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him. So the other servants told the king what had happened. The king's servant had his fellow servants sent to prison over the debt until it could be repaid. This angered the king, and he confronted his servant, indicating he was a wicked servant not to have forgiven his fellow servant the way he himself had been forgiven. So the king decided that his original debt would not be forgiven, and he would be sent to prison until he could repay the great debt he had owed to the king. In the heavenly kingdom, this trespass of sins against God is a much larger debt that was forgiven. A small, minuscule debt was owed one man to another man by comparison. So viewed like this, the debt of man is inconsequential and should have easily been forgiven. It was a much greater debt forgiven him by God. This would bring anger to God. Forgive to be forgiven. So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not everyone his brother their trespasses. The unforgiving servant was a hypocrite. He applied a different standard to himself than to others. Somehow he felt that though he was forgiven his great debt, he did not owe forgiveness to others. He did not forgive even a small trespass, ultimately to his own detriment. And he incurred God's anger. So we are taught to forgive, to be forgiven. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Or you will risk the anger and the wrath of God. Ephesians 4:32. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Be sure and hit subscribe. And I hope we'll see you at our website at www.onfirecafe.net.